I don't know what the AAA games market in AR looks like. Like, it's so early. It's like, what would that even be? And what games are that? Like, that's really hard to project. Like, as people always are like, I feel like assume that I have $1 billion idea for an AR game that, like, I'm just like, no one knows yet. It's not there. Like, it's too early. Like, I couldn't go to VC and pitch them with $1 billion AR game idea. And if you have one, you're probably wrong, because who knows, right? Like, we have Pokemon Go as the one example, and there's a lot of reasons that it was successful and continues to be successful. I think it's a great product, but like, there's not another one of those sitting around that we're all just like, well, someone will make that eventually. But that's what makes it fun. That's what brings me to the space and gets me out of bed every day, is that it's like, let's go figure that out. Like, what works in this space? What does this hardware do? What do people want to do? Like, that's what makes it super exciting to me compared to staying working on flat screen games where we've, kind of know what we're doing at this point. And it's a lot of fun, but there's something interesting about figuring this stuff out that I think drives most of us that are in the space right now.
Truth away from home. Other connection feels so strange. People changing with every phase. Holding tight through space and time. Across dimensions, hearts align.
I met a Rick!
What? Let's dive in.
Welcome back to another episode of the Meta Rick podcast, where we explore the stories of builders, of business leaders working with spatial computing, artificial intelligence, and all sorts of emerging technologies. Today's guest is pretty exciting. This actually came from at MetaConnect a couple months back. This guy, Dustin, was sitting right next to me, and he happened to be holding a pair of the new Snap Spectacles. So he was kind enough to give me a chance to try them out and be able to test that for the first time. And then we started chatting about his story, and he seemed like he has a long background of working in game development, making AAA games at Bungie, and he founded his own studio and has made some of the first AR apps that are in the Snap Spectacles. Actually had a few friends comment specifically on one of his games, and we will get into all of that in just a moment. Dustin, as we get started here, maybe you could give us a little context for your background before starting the studio. When you were working at Bungie in AAA games, like, how did that start? What got you into game development, and maybe talk through the high level of a bit of your career?
Sure, yeah. So I decided I wanted to get into games while I was in high school. Funnily enough, watching the behind-the-scenes documentary from the Halo 2 Collector's Edition, they had a doc in there on the bonus disc that I watched, and that kind of was very interesting to see some people talking about how they made games and like that as a career. And the thing that really stuck with me that made me think, wow, this could be really interesting, is that they talk a lot about failure in that video, which is something that I didn't expect. Most behind the scenes stuff is very like, everything is great and we know how we're doing and it's really, really good. And they talked a lot about like, we finished the E3 demo and we have no idea what we're doing to finish this game. And that was really interesting to me. It was very honest, and it made me feel like, wow, that's a really cool space to get into. So I went to school for games. I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology in upstate New York. For a degree in game development. So I did that for 4 years, and founded a student startup while I was there. And we, did a bunch of side project stuff, and figured out kind of while I was there that I wanted to get into game production, which is my specialty, working as a producer traditionally. And that's what I was at Bungie. And then basically right after school, got into the space working at a small startup in Portland for a little while. And then started interviewing at Bungie soon after that. And I was working there starting in early 2015 on House of Wolves was the first release I worked on as a production coordinator. And then was there for 7.5 years, working up to senior producer, working on the Destiny franchise for that whole time.
So let's break this up into pieces, and we'll kind of go through these eras of the story of Dustin. So I want to start with the gaming school era. So when you were studying on how to do game design, you mentioned that you started a startup while in school. And I feel like this is really common. A lot of founders that I talk to that are entrepreneurial and go off on their own, like, they tend to, in their past, either in high school or college or whatever, either try starting a business or maybe even just like hustling, doing something kind of above and beyond the normal. What was that startup? Talk me through a little bit of what you were working on back then.
Sure, yeah. So there was four main people, and then we added a fifth person later on, and we started working together basically at the beginning of sophomore year. Basically after our first kind of here's how to make a full game in back then it was quarters, so like in 10 weeks or whatever a quarter length was. I don't remember exactly. And so we kind of did that, where it's like break into project teams and make something, and several of us that did that had a really good time doing that, and said, oh, we know that we probably need to do more than the minimum. And they've been kind of telling us this, behind the scenes all of freshman year, like, hey, your degree is great, but like, you need to have a portfolio of cool stuff you've made. That's how you're going to get further in this space. So we were kind of already thinking like, oh, we should probably be figuring out how to build some more stuff. And so we decided to start working together to, do, sort of nights and weekends development of games, specifically finishing and taking one of the games that we made in class a little bit further. But then as the years, went by, we went to different competitions to enter games that we made. The biggest one was over at a school that's unfortunately now defunct called Mass Digi, where up in Boston area, where we pitched them at the pitch jam that they had, and won an award from that gave us a little bit of ability to set up a legal entity, which we did a terrible job of and really had no idea what we were doing, but did that and went through that process, got a little bit of funding, and basically just for the rest of my college career, built a bunch of different games, specifically focusing we were in the serious games space. That was kind of our vibe. So things that were meant to be more educational than entertainment in a lot of ways. Our most popular was one called Energy Drive, which was the one that won that award, which was sort of a like strategy game where you're building clean energy solutions on a top-down map and trying to teach people about green energy type stuff. So that was the main thing we did, but nothing crazy commercial came out of that. But it was definitely something we put a lot of energy into. And I think I guess the biggest point of all that'll link up later is my current co-founder that I run the studio with today. I was one of the people in that startup. So we met in school, and we're very good friends from back then, and then obviously now have a business together many years later.
Love that. I love that long-term connections with people that have kind of seen you through multiple stages of your life and you've been around through that development. I think there's this like automatic trust that gets built where it's a lot easier to be able to collaborate on things and to be able to have this kind of healthy tension where you can push back on each other a little bit and not feel offended or like you have to kind of walk on eggshells or whatever. Like it's a little easier to work together with people when you have that longevity. This is really interesting. So back then, it seems like it was like a lot of self-learning, right? It was like this passion and curiosity. You got a group of people around you and you could all kind of just self-teach and iterate off of each other. Then moving into something like Bungie, I imagine that's much more structured of an environment. And it's probably a pretty big change from kind of doing your own thing. How did you discover the role with Bungie and get started with them? And what was that transition like for you to go from stumbling through learning on your own to having more structure?
So the role actually came about because the job I took right out of school, which was a like internship that turned into sort of like a temporary gig, I knew was going to end at a certain point because I didn't need a full-time, junior producer past kind of the 6 or 8 month mark that I was there for. But my boss there, and this is a point I bring up to lots of people about connections, is my boss there of complete random chance happened to know someone who was in the production org at Bungie and was excited about the work that I did with them because I, try to always put my best into the jobs I've had, and he was willing to ask for a recommendation or give a recommendation to that person. And so I was able to start interviewing at Bungie while I was basically transitioning out of that job. And so that interview process went on for a bit just because they were doing a little bit of a thing called shipping all of Destiny 1 in the fall. So, and then into the holiday season, which we all know, everything closes down. So, but basically I was, on that path of getting that job while I was still at my previous job and kind of wrapping things up, which has always been a big lesson I've taken with me, that like you never know who knows people in this space. And so that can work to your advantage in amazing ways, but also to your disadvantage if you don't put your best work into something. So I'm just going to phone this in, like this is a temp job, I don't care. If I hadn't done I had no idea when I took this job that this connection existed. Like if I did a bad job or phoned it in, like this guy probably wouldn't have staked his reputation on offering to, say, hey, this guy's good, you should consider him for a job. So that always stuck with me as like, be ready for that stuff and try to always put your best foot forward on stuff, because people talk, and it can work out really well for you. But yeah, moving into the AAA space was definitely a big transition, as you said, moving away from figuring stuff out to everything being sort of regimented and sorted out. But that was something I wanted to really learn about. That was one of the big reasons why some people often ask me, well, why didn't you just keep the startup going out of school? Why didn't you want to dive right into creating your own company? And for me, that was one of the big things I knew I was missing, was like, how does a real company actually like run? Like, what are all the components of actually running a more structured business and operating that? And so that was the biggest thing I wanted to learn while I was there. And yeah, I mean, it was a big jump. You have to learn a lot of new process for everything, right? Like, there's a bunch of people who've come before you that have set up a bunch of rules for how things work. You need to learn what those are and how stuff operates. Luckily, I had a very good mentor who was my manager, and also my mentor who showed me how the tooling that he was using worked, how the various tracking software he was running was set up and customized, and put me on a team that was kind of self-contained, and that made it a little bit easier to understand. I think the hardest part is honestly building all of the connections you need, especially for production, right? Like project management, you're working with a bunch of people all the time. And so learning who all those people are and what they do and what the like connective tissue that goes out from your like team, that was the really hard part for me, because it just takes time. You can't kind of like hack your way through meeting the 50 people that you're actually going to be interacting with. Like, that takes, 50 days if you met one of them each day, and you probably don't. So that was the hardest part, was like tracing all of that out and tracking, like, oh, who actually calls the shots? Who are the people I need to be accountable to? The data information and, managing the team and stuff, like that stuff's, somewhat transferable, especially when you're starting out on a small team. But like understanding the organization, that was the part that was like a big eye opening. Oh, how does all of this work? I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking in AAA game, especially AAA games today, right? Like, we're talking about, AAA games today are like producing a blockbuster movie. Like, you've got hundreds of people coming together on one title to be able to make this stuff work. It's kind of like for Google search to work. Like, we're being an engineer on Google search is you're probably working on one aspect of the code base to help add to the direction of this bigger vision. So when you were starting at Bungie, I mean, you started in a relatively junior role earlier in your career, and you were there for almost a decade. I mean, I think over 7 years, kind of moving up into that senior producer role eventually. What were some of the things you picked up from the beginning to the end of your time at Bungie, like some key takeaways from working within such an established company?
I think the biggest one for me was learning how to scale yourself in an organization like that, because as you're getting more responsibility, I think this comes across most disciplines, production though, especially, obviously the frame that I have is that, yeah, scaling yourself to be able to do more work with less hands-on time, because by the largest position I had was managing a team of about 90 who was in charge of like all of the gear content for the game. And that, is like front to back, right? Like from 3D modeling and concepting all the way through, animation, rigging, VFX, like the whole pipeline for all of the gear that goes into Destiny, which people don't know is a very gear heavy game. We're talking like hundreds and hundreds of items that are being produced year over year. And so that's a lot of people, right? Like, you as one human being can't really contain all of that in your brain all the time. And so you have to get better at scaling your skill set and how you manage things in an organization, right? I had a couple of people working under me at this point, so I'm learning how to be a manager, how to mentor people, and then how to delegate in a way that's going to make sure that you're getting what you need, but also have a handle on what's going on. And it's hard to do, right? You go from being hands-on everything, understanding every piece of what's going on, to this weird world where you don't actually know at any given time the status of every little thing that you're doing, but you need to know how to find out quickly. And you need to know, where are the points that I need to be putting the limited amount of time that I can put into this? What are those hot areas? What are those areas that need a little more focus, a little more attention from someone with a higher order skill set? Versus things that are just going to be on a glide path. You're like, yep, I have no idea what those people are doing, but I know that they're doing it right, and I will check in with them on some cadence, and then that's it. That's all I got. I can't, there's not enough hours in the day to manually touch everything anymore. And it's really uncomfortable, like, especially if you're a highly motivated, like, driven person, like, you probably got there because you have a mastery of like that entire piece of everything because that's how you got to that place. But then you'll find that, yeah, you're going to run out of room to be able to do that anymore. And giving that stuff up is very uncomfortable at first. I know I was very uncomfortable handing those things away and be like, well, I hope that works. But that's what you have to do to keep, accelerating up the ladder and being able to take on more responsibility, right? Like regardless of, because every business is going to be different with the, like, how does the ladder work and how do you climb them and stuff. But like being able to scale yourself, absolutely something you'll have to do no matter where you go.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's across multiple divisions and departments. This is a common thing where you'll have someone who's an amazing individual contributor, and that's what gets them promoted, is they were so good at doing that individual contributor role, whether that be a designer or sales rep or software engineer or whatever. But those skill sets don't always transfer over to what it takes to be a very good manager. Like, it's a little bit different. I think it gains you a certain level of respect. Like if you're in a managerial role and you've never been in the individual contributor role, that can be really tricky for a team to look up to you. And it's very easy to discount what you say of like, oh, well, you've never designed a model before. Like, how can I listen to you? Or you've never done a cold call before. How can I listen to you? Right? Like, that's really hard to achieve. So I think having that base of like understanding the frontline role and knowing what it is helps a lot. But what's an example of something like maybe a tactic or maybe a specific story on how to build that trust? So like once you're in that role and you've realized like, okay, I need to now delegate, I need to let go of some of these things. How do you earn the trust of the people underneath you to be able to collaborate effectively and make sure that they actually are aligned with your vision or the directions that you're giving?
I think the two things that I can think of off the top of my head are like, first of all, like really spending a bit of time not touching anything at first. Like whenever I would move to a new team, I think some people's intuition is to just start immediately like bringing over what you've done before because you're like, well, it worked before, it'll work again. And I find that taking like a 2-week-ish hands-off time is really like the way that I always want to start these kind of relationships with teams, to just learn how are they doing things now, right? Like I think it's really hard to understand the context, because something that you look at and you might say, oh, that doesn't make, why would you do things that way? That's super inefficient. We should get rid of that immediately. There's probably a really good reason for that. And you should figure out what that really good reason is. And people really respect that heavily, that you are willing to try to understand, like you're saying, the work that they're doing, even if it's not an area you have expertise in, first before trying to implement new things. And of course, you're always going to have like, there's going to be mandates from above and you're going to have to do things. You're like, wow, this is not what's best, but this is what we have to do, right? But like wherever possible, if you can suss out the reasonings behind how did things get to this point, that will serve you super well. And people respect when you're willing to listen to them and learn from them first. Like, how is it that you're doing this? What is the reason for doing this? Why have you done this way? It makes more informed decisions, I think, which can be super helpful. Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that I think about a lot is just like making sure that you're customizing process to the team. I think there's a lot of value in taking that stuff that you learned from your observation time and then looking at whatever kind of, ways that you're looking to scale or ways that you're looking to add efficiency or whatever you're trying to do. And making sure that you're customizing those things to the team as much as you can. A specific example that we ended up doing was tracking software, where there was the art teams were all being asked to use like sort of more dev style tracking software, essentially like a Jira database, very rote task, waterfall, connection-y stuff, right? And the art teams like do not love using that stuff, at least the ones I worked with. Like it just felt very cold, very, very developer-y, very like, this is not how I think about my work at all. And so we ended up lobbying for and getting a tool. I think it's called ShotGrid now. At the time it was called Shotgun, which was very confusing because that's like a thing that we were building a lot of 3D assets for too. This tool ShotGrid, which is a like art first kind of tracking software that it is very visual. It uses lots of ability to like put, images and video and stuff in. And we brought that software online, and that really, it was a lot of work. It was a heroic amount of work to kind of move everything over to this new piece of tracking software. But that made it super easy for the artists to be able to update their status organically without needing a producer to like manually input all the information. And like, that was a major efficiency saving where it was like, oh, the artists and the art leads can now basically do a bunch of stuff that like producers were doing manually before. This is a massive time savings. And so now I've scaled myself out of needing to be the guy in the room writing down all this stuff on a laptop. Like they are able to do most of it self-serve because this tool works for them, right? And so that was a really good the way that we were able to like gain that efficiency, build that trust because the tool is working better than what they were using before and they like using it more, and showing, hey, I'm going to do things that are going to make your life hopefully easier, but then also my life easier, and we're all able to get what we need. So those are a couple of tactics I've used for that sort of thing.
I love that. I think it comes down to empathy. It's like trying to understand why certain processes are painful and like why people aren't using a tool in a certain way, or why they actually are asking for this different tool. Like kind of always going back to that reasoning of trying to empathize with someone's perspective and then be able to make thoughtful decisions based on that. And it's the same thing with clients, right? Like when we were working with clients, when we're working with coworkers, with everybody, like I feel like it comes down to that foundation of why are we actually doing this before we get hung up on what we're doing or how we're doing it or whatever. I do want to shift gears a little bit because what I'm really excited to talk to you about is DB Creations and the stuff you're doing now. Talk me through the timeline on this. So DB Creations, it looks like you started while you were at Bungie, or kind of almost in line with like the early days of when you were starting off there. So what sparked the start of DB Creations, and what was the transition like to move into that being your full-time kind of dedicated role?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, the LinkedIn timeline's weird because there's a lot of overlap that's somewhat hard to parse, and we also have a hard time figuring out exactly where do you want to delineate these things, because it's very muddy, as it always is, I think, with this kind of thing. But yeah, my co-founder and I, I had mentioned earlier, we met in college. We built stuff together in college. We both ended up in the Seattle area for different jobs and different reasons, but ultimately, like, we're in the same area, and so we stayed in touch. We were still good friends, and we both have been very interested in the MR space. I'm gonna call it MR. I'm sure someone will be angry about that, but like, I don't want to say VR, AR, MR every time, so I'm gonna say MR, and we're gonna go with that. But the MR space, since we've been in college, he bought a DK1, and we'd been messing around with that and making ourselves sick, playing Mirror's Edge and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So we really wanted to keep playing in that space, and neither of our day jobs at the time, back in like 2016, 2017, when we did some of our experimentation stuff, did that. So it was nice because we were not in violation of any moonlighting agreements, which often get in the way of side project stuff, but both of us, were working outside of the realm of what we did in our day jobs at the time. So it was, not something that was really a big issue. And it was an interesting space. We were really excited about like standalone stuff like the Gear VR and the Quest when that was coming out. And so, we wanted to play around in that space, but also, knew that we wouldn't get in trouble by doing that. So it was a good, safe place to do, fun nights and weekends, kind of hackathon-y type stuff. And picked a bunch of different problems that we wanted to tackle. The biggest one we probably got around to was we made an ebook reader, for a VR ebook reader, maybe the first ever made. I don't really know if that's 100% true, but certainly one that has somewhat well known, called Chimera Reader, for the Gear VR, and we ported that around to a bunch of places. Made a little bit of pocket money here and there on that sort of thing, like doing ports for a couple grand, but just playing around with stuff, like, because we wanted to keep ourselves fresh in the space and see where things are going. And then we got a little more serious when my co-founder jumped over to the HoloLens team at Microsoft. And so now he's doing AR type stuff in his day job, and that's very exciting and very interesting. We're feeling some more momentum coming. We're getting the Quest coming out. We've got the PSVR that's doing things. We've got a lot of people playing in the MR space. That's very exciting. And so we decided to start building some bigger stuff. And so we're doing a little bit of like, we'd wanted to do AR from the beginning, and that was hard because there wasn't a lot of places to do, but we did manage to make one AR game that we sort of hacked together called Table Trenches, which was on iOS and Android. I think it's still up on those for ARKit and AR Core. And then also on the X-Real glasses, which were called the Nreals at the time, the Nreal lights, the bright red ones. And that was our first headset thing that we were able to do that we were really excited about. And so we put that stuff out there, and we're like, oh, this will maybe get a lot of featuring because it's, what was it, 2018, 2019? I don't remember. The pandemic timeline has really messed with the dates of everything. But like, we thought, oh, there's not a lot of AR content. People will be excited about AR content. The App Store will feature this. That will be great. And then we were sadly disappointed when that did not happen, and there was not a lot of interest in AR content on mobile at the time. We're like, well, darn, that was a bummer. So we moved over to VR for a bit and built one VR game called Rhythm and Bullets, which is somewhat well known by a few people out there. Ported that to the PSVR, which was fun and a lot of work, but fun. And then it's on the Quest as well. And once again, we're like, oh, maybe this will hit big. It has people that played it, but it definitely didn't like hit big enough. It was like, all right, found a company around this right now. So still fell into that sort of nights and weekends work. And then we started working on an Oculus Start pitch for a naval strategy game that never came out, but we did have a demo out for a while. And that was kind of not going anywhere. And so really our big break came from that project. We were doing some like testing of other platform stuff, and we built a face lens in Lens Studio using one of the character models from that naval strategy game. It was just like a face tracking lens with like a 3D model head of one of the characters that we put out there as sort of like a test for, oh, we might do some promo in this way because Snapchat actually has AR content. That's kind of cool. And neither of us had used Snapchat like in years, if ever. So it was kind of like novel to be like, oh, let's see what Snapchat's doing. Oh, they do AR. Oh, interesting. Maybe we mess with that. And they actually, when we put that out there, someone from the Snap team reached out to us and said, hey, that's cool that you're doing some stuff. Like, we should talk more about this kind of thing. It seems like you guys do AR dev. And we're like, ooh, yeah, definitely. And that's when we learned about their program called Ghost, the Ghost Innovation Lab, I think is what the full name was. And I think they just call it Ghost now. And that's a funding program that, gets funding behind AR projects on Lens Studio. And so we learned about that and made a little video and showed off a demo of some stuff that we'd made in the past that was, and kind of explained a vision for building more AR content. And we wanted to do another strategy title like Table Trenches because that was our one AR thing we'd done, and sent that off. And then lo and behold, got ourselves into the program. And that came with a funding grant that was much bigger than, pocket change we'd been getting for porting work we were doing. And so that really put us on the path where it was like, okay, yeah, like, and this is 2021-ish at this point. We're like, okay, now we got some money. We can like pay some contractors. Let's like make this thing go for real. And my co-founder had kind of already left his job to go into this full time. And I was, like, as soon as we get enough money, I'm ready to do it too. And so the last piece of this to kind of get to where it's like, all right, now the studio fully exists is after we got into the innovation lab and started on our Snap project. We also were recommended to apply to Snapchat's, unfortunately now defunct, business accelerator called Yellow. And so we applied to that as well, and got into that and began in the spring of 2022. And so getting into that came with a little bit more funding, enough that it was like, well, we can do the math and we could both go full time on this and pay ourselves salaries. So once we got into the accelerator, that was when I started my transition out of my role at Bungie. I did the accelerator while I was still working there, but I was basically, I told them I was going to be leaving to do this eventually, and I basically offboarded while I was training my backfill and doing the accelerator in the meantime, which was kind of interesting. And then in the spring after that ended, I left my job and we were both full time. And so now here we are.
So first of all, shout out Snapchat. That's awesome. So cool that so it starts as a passion project. It's similar to your days back in college and with the same guy, funny enough. It's like, let's just have fun building stuff. And, we've got this established process with these full-time jobs, but we want to do other stuff. Let's do AR and VR stuff. Let's play around, let's learn, and let's put things out there and see what happens. I love this energy and I love the passion that you put behind that. Snapchat comes to you now. That's got to feel amazing. That's got to feel like this incredible validation. Was the grant for a specific project or a specific game? Was it more like, hey, we just like the quality of your work and trust you to go build cool stuff? Like, talk me through a little bit of what the actual details were behind that first grant.
Yeah, the first grant was a specific project grant. So we pitched them specifically a game title for the Lens Studio, and specifically to be a lens inside of Snapchat. And like I said, it was built off of the previous work we did for the X-Reel/mobile title, basically trying to bring strategy gameplay to the living room. And we wanted to do more with the like room meshing capabilities they have. So like basically making the player's room, whatever they scan, is the game map, right? So that's something we've wanted to play with for a long time. And we weren't able to do with the previous versions of stuff because back when we were just doing AR Kit and AR Core stuff, it's like, flat plane is all we can really track. And that was really cool. We did some neat stuff with that. But we wanted to get deeper into, okay, let's get a real depth mesh. Let's like make that. So that was the big part of our pitch. Is like, hey, we want to use your tech that seems like it can do this, especially at the time on the LiDAR-enabled iPhones. We're giving quite good meshes. Let's use that and build a basic strategy game, which we've kind of already done before, and you can see the results of that and the amount of popularity it has relative to the platforms and whatever. And we are two experienced guys that have done a bunch. I've been building games for a while. My co-founder comes from HoloLens. Like we kind of know what we're doing. Let's build something cool. And so, yeah, that grant was specific for, we give you money, we give you X amount of time, and then you build this thing. And then that kind of got folded in with the project that we were pitching for the Business Accelerator too. Was like, that was a big piece of it. Was like launching that game was kind of alongside the studio was kind of then how those things came together. Obviously separate programs at Snap, but they kind of went hand in hand.
So this is super cool, by the way. I love this catalyst for how you kind of solidified having this business kind of get started. There's a couple of things that are interesting about it. Is like, one, I think when people think of startups that get grants and investment and capital, like they normally think of like SaaS startups or B2B, or like I'm building some sort of platform that's going to have this huge multiple exit, and that's the only thing worth investing in. But in reality, like services and being able to just develop really cool experiences and products for consumers, like there's other ways to build businesses that are also worth funding, and then there's funding opportunities for these types of businesses too. So that's one takeaway from the story right away, is I think it's really exciting to hear capital getting funneled into these other sorts of value adds to society, really. With that game, what was the distribution model for that, right? Because this is obviously with a mobile-based AR game, it's going to be very consumer-focused. I'm imagining there's some sort of tie-in to Snapchat's marketplace of some kind. Did they put marketing dollars and budget around it, or list it in the marketplace in a special way? Or at this point, do you guys start building up any marketing for the studio, or how do you actually get the game in front of users?
So Snapchat's very interesting because all of their content is deployed through the Lens carousel. So if you're using Snapchat, right, like at the bottom of the screen when you have the camera open, you have a bunch of like little icons of things down there. And typically they're like, face filters, right? You've got, or like the dancing hot dog guy that everybody kind of knows, right? Like you just kind of are flipping through these very like flippantly. And that's where the games are deployed as well. Which has been one of the areas that we've been working with them on, was wanting to figure out like, hey, can we put more fully featured content in here to drive, higher, user like engagement time on a specific item, because a lot of those lenses, it's like seconds is like good. And it's like, oh, cool. Someone used this lens to like make a face overlay for like several seconds. That's pretty good. We like that. And so that was a big part of us wanting to work with them and them wanting to work with us, was to figure out, hey, can we deploy longer form content down here, and like, will people engage with that, and like, what does that look like? I'd say it's an ongoing project and thing we're working with them on, but that was the big test, was like, is that going to be the thing? And they have the ability to drive behind the scenes different aspects of that stuff in terms of featuring and whatever. So they were pulling levers and such to have different stuff pop up and try different things. So really, we were more, at least for this one, like kind of just building a cool game for them to push the tech. That was the main thing, more than, we didn't have any sort of like user goals that we even were setting with them. It was all about like, hey, can you use our software, Lens Studio? Because that's the other interesting about Snapchat is like, you're not building in Unity or any of the other sort of traditional games tools. They have their own specific engine called Lens Studio that you're building all your content in. And so like, that was kind of the big thing. We were being brought in as more tech experts to be like, we're going to push this thing as hard as it can go. It's usually used just for like face filter overlays, and we're going to put like a full game in there that has to fit in the footprint of 8 megabytes, and we're going to see what happens. And that was the main thing they wanted. And a lot of that was us giving feedback on like, hey, this is the like areas where there's friction. This is where you could maybe improve this. We tested some specific features that they were building as well. Like, we were one of the first apps, or I don't know, lenses, I guess, that used their in-app purchase in Lens Digital Goods system. So, actually having the ability for players to get custom things, through inside of one of these lenses, which was a big thing they were testing that year. And so it was kind of around that frame more than like having a big marketing plan, a big push to like say, hey, we have this big new thing we're doing with games. It was, it's kind of more about a tech test.
That makes a lot of sense, right? It's like, they're diving into a new area where I think Snapchat sneakily became a leader in augmented reality through mostly these social filters at first and then expanding that over time. And now they've got like the whole Snap TV thing, and they've really built themselves into a pretty unique social experience. Like I'd say it's pretty different than most of the other platforms. With those lenses, now that you've gone a little bit further, so it seems like that first one is almost like a POC. It's like this technical exploration. Is there a monetization model for these sort of AR games? Like, is there like an upsell where someone spends money almost like buying like an app-based game, or is it licensing brand IP? Like I know there's a lot of brands that'll advertise through some sort of a filter, like the F1 tire, for example, and things like that. What's the model for how you make money off of games like this?
Yeah, so on Snap, on the mobile platform, Spectacles being a different, put that in a different bucket and not think
We'll
about
get
that
to
right now.
we'll get to Spectacles in a couple minutes.
We'll get there. But yeah, for like traditional lenses, I mean the main way that developers are making money is through the lens creator like program, where Snapchat has this very interesting thing where they basically serve as like matchmakers between developers, especially smaller developers, but also there's full shops that they work with, and advertising partners. And so Snapchat has built a good business about connecting those two parties together and saying like, hello, like person who wants to advertise, what would you like to build? Okay, we have a bunch of like curated developers that are in our program that we would gladly point you to, like, and then you guys figure out what you want to do, and then we will facilitate getting it up, and then we all win in theory. And so that is the main way people make money being Snapchat developers right now, is doing branded advertising content. That comes in a lot of forms, right? Like it doesn't have to just be like an overlay filter kind of thing. Like people are doing interactives, people are doing, specific, integrations with physical places, and there's all kinds of different paths people are taking with it, but that's the primary way that you're making money. There is as I mentioned, the in-lens digital goods system, but I'd say the platform is a little newer for that sort of thing, and users aren't necessarily primed for spending money inside of lenses currently. So that's an ongoing thing that's, I'd say, is still being worked on to figure out exactly the best way to turn it into a really good revenue path people can roll.
So one specific example from your website, and this one is near and dear to my heart because I actually pitched Lionsgate on using this IP for other things that didn't work out, unfortunately. But it was a pie in the sky thing. They didn't come with a brief or anything. I was just like, I've got cool tech. Let's find a way to make something cool. And luckily they heard me out. We had a good chat about it, but that was about as far as it went. But where I'm getting at is John Wick, one of the coolest, most exciting original stories I think we've seen in a very long time when it comes to action films and kind of creating this really great IP. I love it. And this seems like one of these styles of games, right? So this is like branded IP as an augmented reality game through Snapchat. Is that how that connection was made? Was through Snapchat kind of connecting their brand with you? Or is that one that you could dive into any detail about how that started and what the process was?
Yes, absolutely. I'm more than happy to do. What? I just bumped my monitor. Sorry. But yeah, so that one is really interesting. It normally would go that way, but interestingly enough, we got connected up with Lionsgate because we had our game, the one that we built with the Ghost Innovation Lab, called Table Trenches Operation Living Room, was actually up for Lens of the Year at the awards that year, and I guess it must have been the end of 2022, and we actually won for, I forget the category that year because they changed the categories, but it was like best game or something like that. I don't remember. It's embarrassing, but so we had the game win, and we were very excited. Yay, we win this award! And then I think in early January or maybe late December, I don't remember. After the award show, somebody from Lionsgate reached out to us directly. Because they had seen Snap's award show and said, hey, you guys built some cool stuff in AR. We want to do an AR connected experience. Like, can you guys do that sort of thing? We were like, whoa, business is coming to us from the Lens Awards. This is amazing. So they actually reached out to us first, and then we kind of talked to Snapchat after we had sort of gone back and forth and developed the pitch to figure out what we wanted to do. So we actually worked with them outside of that program, funnily enough. But yes, that was where that one came from initially.
And what does the model look like with, and it doesn't necessarily have to be specific to John Wick, but like a brand like this comes to you, I can totally see how that makes sense, right? Like they see the quality of your work, they have some kind of a vision where they want to participate in that channel, and it's a newer channel. So going to someone like you whose team is experienced with this and has actually been around it for a while, you're going to know things that they don't know, and you can help them skip mistakes. And there's similar agencies that specialize in Roblox, for example, or in Fortnite and like these other platforms. Each one has its own nuances. So it makes a lot of sense. They find you, they come in, they're like, we want some experts. We like what you do. Is that model something where they're just funding the development work of building the game? Or is it something more like a marketing channel where it's based on like time spent and like the actual engagement with the content? Or how do you develop that business relationship?
So that one with them was directly like they paid for like we just went back and forth on the creative for what we were gonna do, and then it was very traditional, like we give you X dollars, you give us the lens. And that was kind of very, very easy transactional. And I think that's how a lot of these go, because the user AC numbers are hard to like nail down. And so having that be set would be something that I would be a little uncomfortable with making my like primary, like with this stuff, with AR, like in general, I'd say a theme right now is like a lot of us are ending up wanting and needing to be paid up front, because like users, we're all figuring that out. Like nobody has like a line on like, yes, all of the MR users, this is exactly how we get money out of them. Like nobody knows yet. So that was a very traditional, like we signed a, a statement of work up front to just set, a full budget for the thing. And then, that was we just worked against that.
And you might not know this, but does Snapchat have a model for that? Because I'm trying to draw a parallel to say, like, I used to work in the photo video space, and we actually built a platform kind of similar to the process you're talking about, where Snapchat would connect the brands to the creators. Our tool is called Snapwire, and basically we would help brands go in and find photographers and videographers and assign them to a creative brief, and then they would work on these projects. We had nothing to do with the media spend either and the performance of it, but then they would take that content and put it somewhere, like advertising banner ads on DoorDash or Facebook ads or whatever. Does Snapchat have that sort of model as well, where they have like almost like a media model? And sorry if I'm totally ignorant here. I know minimal to nothing about Snapchat's business, to be honest.
No, totally. So I believe the main, and like I said, we kind of went in a different path. I believe the main way their connection works is that once the developer has made the advertising like content, right, then the advertiser then pays for advertising blocks like you would anywhere else to have that content be promoted, so that it'll show up in the lens carousel, so it'll show up on the like mid rolls between people doing the video content, however it's meant to be deployed. Like then they just pay for the featuring like you would kind of anywhere else, right? So they're basically selling the ad space on top of the, but the main thing that the advertiser's getting is that custom content from these developers, and that's what they're sort of buying that, as opposed to having to make it in-house or whatever. They're getting somebody that knows how to build this stuff and is going to do a good job with it, ideally. And then, for us, we're just building the thing, and then we basically hand it to them and say, okay, we've built the thing to your specifications, you've signed off on it, we got paid, we're happy. You can promote that as much or as little as you want, right? That's out of our hand. Like our John Wick lens was specifically deployed around the home video release. So they chose like a time frame and whatever, like, oh, we want to have this message coming out, for this amount of duration or whatever. And they deal with all that with Snapchat. I don't have to think about any of that. That's on them to determine how they want to do with their business unit and everything else.
Yeah, part of what makes me so interested in this channel, and part of why I'm asking about some of the business model around it is, on the show we kind of focus on go-to-market a little bit, but one of the things I'm drawing a comparison to is like gaming and advertising are merging together more and more, right? So like I play a lot of 2K and the basically virtual basketball, and advertisement's huge. Like, I mean, Kia, I'm sure, spends a very good chunk of money to get their Kia logo in the arenas in 2K and be in front of people all the time. And then there's these open worlds, kind of like Fortnite, where you can wander around and be your player and play pickup with your friends, and there's advertisements kind of riddled through those environments, right? And that's kind of an owned channel for 2K, where they have this ongoing advertisement. But with Snapchat, it's kind of interesting because it feels like a merger between these two worlds, where it's not a game that's the actual channel. Like Snapchat's a social media platform that's more the channel of where the content's being consumed, more like a traditional kind of paid video or photo ad. But the content itself that they're distributing is a game. So it's like working with a developer like you to develop the content and then distribute that content themselves through Snapchat. It's a pretty interesting business model. What's an example? Because I feel like this is such a unique channel for brands. It's new, and it's something where there's not like a standard playbook built out as far as I know. Do you have any examples of a brand activation where using kind of brand IP for an AR game like this has done very, very well versus an example that maybe not a specific brand, but like mistakes that you see where people try to do this type of advertising and kind of stumble and maybe it's a little cringe or they don't get it quite right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if I have a good example off. Advertising is not our core business, so I don't have a great sense of like most successful versus least successful activations that have been done, even on Snapchat. Like I know the Lego one that they did in the real world did really well, but like what that means, I don't quite know. I would say I can definitely talk to the second piece though of like mistakes that can be made, at least from my perspective, and I'm sure different people disagree. I think the biggest one that you can make is not building something that plays to the strengths of why you're doing it in augmented reality. Like I see a lot of things that like probably would be better as not augmented reality. And this is true across like this is one of the big like it's one of my big hills that I will die on is that like you need to have an understanding of why you're doing a thing in augmented reality or mixed reality or whatever. Like just taking a thing and putting it into that is not engaging for most people. Like it can be for a second, but it's not actually doing something that they couldn't get anywhere else. Like it's a banner ad, but it's in my room. Okay, cool. It's still just a banner. It didn't do anything new. And so I think that's the biggest piece that I always recommend is like work with someone or spend the time to figure out why you're doing it in this, because you're going to spend more time and more money making a good AR thing. And if you do it good, then it will be very engaging and people will think it's very cool. Snap has a bunch of great numbers that they show about how much people engage deeply with like good AR content. But like if you do a bad job, then you're going to have spent more time and more money making a thing that people will be probably more likely to bounce out of because it's going to ask more of the user. And so being cognizant of that and not just treating it like this is hot and new, let's do this. Have a good reason for it. And that's what I loved about working with Lionsgate is they came to us and said, we want to do a multiplayer AR thing that's all about these physical cards that we want to show off. And we think that taking those, like making a virtual version of these cards is going to be really rad because like we think that would be cool for players to get into this dueling mindset, together in person. And like, we're like, yes, that is a great example of actually thinking about the space and applying it, not just saying, let's put a thing in AR because we can, so that was one of the reasons we took that project on because normally, like I said, we don't do a lot of advertising stuff. It's not our core business, but that was like, oh, this is a good fit. You're actually going to want to do a thing that drives, the medium in a way that's going to get engagement from players that are willing to put the time in. Yes, let's build that. Also, it's John Wick, and I'm also a huge John Wick fan. So, like, I'm not going to turn that down, but, it was good that it was also a good match.
Yeah, I love that you say that because I think that it's a way of telling a story, right? Like it's a content medium. And just because AR is very engaging and you can do interesting things with it, doesn't mean that we're abandoning photo and video and these other 2D mediums. People have gotten really good at consuming 2D content. We're familiar with it. We're used to it. Like it's very useful still, but you can do different things with a 3D medium than you can do with a 2D medium. And so thinking about the story you want to tell and how can you do something unique. And I like what you said about the social element of like being able to use this 3D experience to bring two people close together, to have this kind of shared interaction with these 3D objects. I think that's huge, is can we bring people together? Can we create the social element? There's a piece of content I think about that is kind of, I feel mixed feelings about. I don't know if you remember Disney Plus did the Remembering short film as like this augmented reality film.
What was that around? I feel like I did try this one, but it was for what IP was it for?
So it was a short film they made. So they made it from scratch, I think, for this, but it's probably the most viral thing I've ever posted. And I didn't get a ton of following from it or anything, but it just kind of got reposted all over the place. It saw my apartment like on these accounts that I follow and was like, what? That's my apartment. It's crazy. But it was interesting because when I was doing the experience, you scan a QR code on your TV and then the film has like a waterfall that comes out into your living room and has this whole pre-recorded augmented reality experience in your living room. while I was recording it, it's not a great experience. Like I'm holding my phone and I'm looking up at my phone, going through this thing. It didn't feel really great. It's not like a game. It's not very interactive. You're just kind of consuming it. But when I watched the recording afterwards, that was really cool because I was able to see this amazing animation in my living room and like rewatch it and be like, whoa, it feels like that magic is happening in my house, not someone else's house. And that's pretty cool. And so I wonder if there's a balance between like the live interactions in the moment versus recording a piece of content and being able to like look back at it. Kind of a random thought, but I don't know if you...
I think I'd say the biggest thing I always think about with it is it's really hard. Capturing MR content is hard. Like it's one of the hardest things we've like had to run into in general is like, how do we, like we saw it with our spectacles project where it's like, how do we even show what this is? Like the videos on our site are all very like, each one of them had a lot of effort put into them, despite maybe how high quality or not they look. Like capturing MR content is really tricky.
So sorry to cut you off, but let's talk about spectacles because this is why we met. This is why I asked you to be on the pod. I can't believe I waited this long in the pod to bring it up. We'll probably clip it and put it at the beginning. We'll see. But I saw the spectacles ad come out, and there was a very specific piece of that ad, or one of the videos, maybe it was a review, I don't remember. But there's a very specific piece of it that stood out to me, which was this moment where they're using their phone to control the animation. So using Snap Spectacles for this augmented reality object, and then using their phone to like fly it around the room. And I sent that video to a bunch of my non-XR friends, because whenever these launches happen, I always send it to people that aren't into VR yet, because I want a really honest reaction of what do you feel? Like, did this resonate with you? Are we getting there, you know? And the first thing they called out was that app, that same app of controlling the phone. And then when we met at Connect and you showed me the spectacles, I mentioned that app and you're like, that's my app. We made that, which is crazy. What a small world. So cool. I think you guys absolutely killed it. And I think that the specific app that I'm thinking of is Tiny Motors Arcade.
That's correct.
Talk me through how you got access to being a part of Snap Spectacles and what the process was to come up with such a cool game. And I'd just love to hear more about how that got started.
Sure, yeah. So we've been working with Snapchat, like kind of as I talked to earlier, like since the beginning of like us really taking this thing full time. So they've been a deep partner for us for many, several years, we'll say. And we actually had and still have the earlier version, the 2021 spectacles glasses, the ones that are a little bit more edgy, cyberpunk looking, that also have screens in them. And so we got those a while ago and had been messing around with them with some prototypes and stuff just to see what they could do. And we expressed interest in building something together with them, but there wasn't any push for that at the time that we were developing. So we were mostly doing stuff for the phone. And then, you know, we got very secret NDA hush-hush conversations about, hey, there are new spectacles. Like, would you like to maybe do something with those? We said, well, of course, we love headsets. It's our favorite thing to build for. And so it mostly just came truly out of our sort of ongoing working relationship with Snapchat, you know, pushing their technology. Several other of our projects we've done, you know, we're doing that sort of thing. And then, you know, so we were kind of on the short list, I guess, because of our long connection with them. So kind of a boring story, but, you know, that's how we got access to that. In terms of the game pitch, we actually built, and you can find it out there now on Snapchat as well, a quick little demo thing of just a helicopter control game called Table Shoppers, which was just a single, basically you're holding the phone like vertically, and then at the bottom of the screen we have on-screen controls, and it's a little tiny AR helicopter that you fly around and pick up crates and drop them off. And it was like a 30-second to a minute experience, much more like our other lenses. But that's something we kind of built with Snapchat to test out, like, hey, virtual RC stuff seems like that could be kind of cool. Let's try that. And it works well with the vertical form factor of the phone. So we had that demo that we built. And so once we started thinking about what would we do with the new spectacles, that idea came back up where it was like, that was pretty fun. People liked that. Like that lens did pretty well in terms of how our lenses typically do, because it was easy to get into and it matched a fantasy that people have. Something we've really found and is kind of core to a lot of our design philosophy these days is like, childhood toys and childhood memories work really well in MR. something about these like physical things that we had, like bringing them to life in new ways virtually is really compelling to people. And so that one, like all RC vehicles, that was one that kind of stuck well. So we were in that mindset and we liked that idea a lot. And so that's what we started building our pitch around, was like, hey, we want to be pushing the controller thing. Like we want to do, a controller hands-on first experience. We love controllers. We've seen it with lots of hand tracking devices. Hand tracking is cool, but it's hard to get precision. It's hard to get people onboarded into it. We want to build something that's like shove the controller in their hand, start playing, just like you did with Mario on the NES back in the day. And so that was the big thing that we said we want to do, is like we want to get phone as controller. We want to do that early on. And we want to do something with these RC vehicles because we think that feels really good in AR. And also working with, we knew, I'm sure you saw the device as well. Knowing that the FOV is as limited as it is inside of the glasses, it's quite large, but you're still not getting, that full, FOV that we're all kind of hoping for. So we wanted to design something that's going to fit in those like bite-sized windows a little bit better, not something grand and sprawling, but something you're kind of looking at and focusing on so that it's generally always in your field of view. Which we find, works well for people as well. So they're not like, where am I supposed to look? It's like, look at that vehicle that's there. Follow it with your eyes. You'll see it all the time and it'll work well. So it was a good fit for the platform. And it also let us push a couple of the things we really wanted to push in terms of technology and advancing them.
Yeah, I think there's so first of all, there's a few things I love about what you said there. That childhood memories thing is really interesting, because I've interviewed a few different game developers on the show before, like Azure Games and the COO from Blockade Labs. And consistently what I hear from people in this space is that this idea of lean into the fun, like if it's not fun, people won't play it, people won't engage with it. And so thinking of things that people already find fun, and then just translating that to a new medium and retelling that story so they can rediscover that fun again. That seems like a good formula for landing on some really good ideas. One of the things that's interesting about what you do, though, is like there's mobile AR games, which probably are one of the most accessible but most limited forms of AR compared to maybe full headset, like a Quest 3 or Vision Pro or something along those lines, which is the little less accessible, more friction, but a little bit more power, a little bit better hardware to be able to do more immersion. And then something like the Snap Spectacles would fit kind of in the middle of that, where the form factor is a little easier to get a hold of. You can do more than a phone, a little hands-free, but still not quite the same thing as a full-on headset. When you're coming up with ideas for games, how do you balance the creativity of like wanting to do the coolest thing possible with the function of kind of leaning into the tools you have available?
I'd say our studio tends to go very heavy on that function side. Like that's like really key, we've found, because honestly, like with all of this stuff that's so new and like no one's ever done it before, like everything is overscoped. Like things that you assume are going to be easy are not. And so it tends to be a bit of a business imperative, honestly, to like lean in on that like tech side first, because we're going to spend a lot of time like solving whatever that tech problem is, and that's going to be the core innovation. And so as much as I think, the inner creative in all of us wants to like go in that crazy direction, like what I've found is that you can do some of the craziest stuff you've ever done by being very constrained and like making sure that you specifically pick what are those things that we're focusing on. Like, right, for Tiny Motors, it was like controller driven first, and that's going to be a bunch of work to get that good and build whichever designed a controller before. What is that going to, how do we make sure that's easy to use and players can get that? And how do we make sure that the tech is working, on the Snapchat side to get the phone talking to the headset and all that, and then, we've got to make these vehicles feel good, right? Like that's going to be the big thing. That's all about vehicles. They have to feel good. That's a lot of tuning work, right? It's not sexy, grandiose work, but it's like the minutia of how does that plane turn and how does it take those angles to make sure it doesn't move too fast so players lose track of it, but not so slow that it's boring. All of that minutia really adds up to that like compelling experience for people. Because all this stuff, like you said, is so new that like you can really turn people off fast if things aren't working as intended or as players think they should be working, which is the really key one, is like it doesn't matter what you think it should do, it's what the player thinks it should do. And so if it needs to do that, then that's what it should do, because that's how they're going to experience it. And so that's where we always lean, is on that, like, what can the thing do and how can we make it do the thing it does the best, right? And making sure that we work within those constraints. Like our art style for this game, we knew it had to be very like clean and constrained because we're working with small amounts of like storage space, small amounts of memory, slower processors. So we're going back a bit, we're not saying, oh, this is going to have photorealistic textures on all these vehicles. Like, who cares? Like, it needs to run really fast. That's what matters. So that makes a lot of decisions for us. But then I find a lot of excitement in working in those constraints and say, okay, we know this has to be small footprint. So how do we make stuff look cool and pop, and what things can we push on a little bit so that it looks good, but doesn't have to be, this perfect photoreal, everything's got reflections on it craziness that's not necessary to get to the.
Yeah, that idea of creativity within constraint and like owning that is pretty interesting. I look back at when I was a photographer many years ago. We had a film shoot where we were shooting in a car shop that had all these different cars, and it was really cool. It's called Milpas Motors in Santa Barbara. They've got all these like old Corvettes, and then they've got some newer Ferraris, and like all this wide range of cars that you would not expect to see next to each other in the same place. And my buddy had this clothing line that was inspired by the Grand Prix checkered flags. And so we were like, oh, this would be the best place to shoot with all these cool cars, and it'll tie in with the brand really well. The thing about this location, though, is there's so many cars stacked into this tiny little space that any picture is going to have another car right next to it in the background. And if you have that new Ferrari right next to that Corvette, it doesn't really look right. And so how do you take these really creative angles to try and avoid seeing one car and see the one that you want, and try and come up with a good photo still when you have this constraint of the framing and what you can actually do? You can't just take any shot that you want. It's not controlled. But it ended up leading to these amazing photos. Like, we got so many that we were really happy with, and they were really unique shots we probably never would have tried if we weren't constrained by the framing and the space we were in. So I think that when you lean into the constraints that you have, you're totally right. Like, it can lead to innovative ideas and actually being more creative even than if you had complete freedom to do anything you wanted. So that's pretty interesting. There's two more questions I have for you. Do you have a few more minutes? I know we're kind of getting close to time.
No, we're good. Absolutely. Fire away.
Sweet. So one, I have to ask, AI, artificial intelligence. I know it's the buzzword of the world. If I hear another co-pilot for XYZ, like, I'm going to go crazy, but at the same time, I get it. It's so valuable. Like, I understand. But I got to ask, like, are you guys using AI in your process? And if you are, where are you using it? How does it play a role?
Yeah, no, it's a super good question. I mean, a couple years ago when I was doing this, it was all everybody asking me, how are we integrating NFTs and Bitcoin into things? So yeah, it's always the whatever the hot new thing is, it always comes in. It's like, oh, is this going to be applicable to games? I mean, like, there's a cynical answer, which is like, well, we've been using AI for years, right? Like, any game we build that has, an AI controlled player is using AI, but you're talking more, generative AI, I know. So I won't be a jerk. So new modern AI stuff we're using, certainly very interesting stuff going on. Obviously, we're very concerned about copyright and making sure that things that we're creating are going to be, not getting us in trouble in the future. So we're very cautious about its application for things, as I think many people that run businesses are, because we just don't know yet, and we don't want to find out later. And it's interesting where it comes in too. We did some voice recording for our upcoming game that we're doing for the Quest 3, and that was something that several of the voice actors had asked about specifically. It was like, hey, we would like to make sure there are clauses in our contracts to make sure we don't, we're not signing away these lines we're doing to be used to, like, do voice recording or voice AI in the future. And we're like, yeah, of course, that's totally fine. We had no intention of doing that. Happy to put that in there. So it does come in a lot. But in terms of what we're using it for right now, I think the biggest one is actually on the tech side. The engineers are using it for like code conversion stuff, because we're bouncing around between, Lens Studio and Unity and other things. And so they've reported to me, and I am not an engineer, so like take all this with like the grain of salt of this is what my team is telling me, that like they're using it for, code conversions. So like, I wrote this function, or I do this thing in Lens Studio, which is all in JavaScript, I believe, and we're doing this over in C# and Unity. Okay, can you help me convert that over? And it'll do a good enough job that it does save some time there. It's usually not, as far as I understand, like copy paste directly, but it's more like, getting you most of the way there, so you're not like rewriting it from scratch. So that's like a nice thing that I like hearing from those guys, that they're getting a lot of use out of that. And then also, like, basic functions, same deal. Like, oh, hey, we're doing this thing for Apple Vision Pro, and so we have to do that in whatever their language is. Like, how do I write this basic function that I would maybe have looked up on Stack Overflow and might have found like a thread for it, but this is actually a little faster for it to tell me, syntactically, how do I write this basic function? So like, I think that's the biggest thing that impacts our business that people are using it for actively, because they are getting some basic efficiencies out of stuff. We're clearly not writing the code base using AI, but it is helpful for that kind of thing, which is cool. Other than that, I think it usually is just idea generation can be useful. Like we kind of every generation or so, whenever a new version of like Midjourney or whatever comes out, we'll like run some prompts and see, hey, is this helping us generate ideas? Typically, no. Honestly, like AR is hard to envision and it doesn't really know what that means. So like we have a full-time concept artist who's also our art lead. He's much better at understanding what we're trying to do than the tools are now. But, we're always keeping an eye on it because it can be useful for sparking ideas like that, but nothing that's like core to our process currently. So mostly on the tech side right now, but we're keeping a healthy eye on it, and always interested to learn what else it can do. Anything that makes our business a little more efficient, saves us money in the long run. So we're open to it.
I actually love that answer because I feel like a lot of companies, especially smaller companies that are trying to do big work or work with big brands, like they tend to, when they talk about AI, like make it a feature of what they do and like try and upsell and do this like really premium thing. But I think the majority of the opportunity with AI is really in internal operational functions. I think BCG even had a report where they were saying 60% of the value that comes from AI is purely based on operational internal processes. And that's things like what you mentioned, like, can I cut down on code conversions? Can I optimize one engineer to be able to achieve 1.5 engineers or 2 engineers worth of work? I think that is a huge opportunity. And then on the creative side, that's interesting to hear your feedback on that, because that's kind of how I've been playing with Midjourney and a lot of these tools. I don't consider myself an expert or like a prompt engineer or whatever, but every couple months I go back in and I try and check on the progress. And it's like, how good is this? How easy is it to get from giving some direction to getting the vision I want? Can it do consistent characters? Can I get it to actually have the same kind of look, but with small adjustments? Like, what are the advancements that are happening? I will say the newest thing with Midjourney with its editor blows my mind a little bit. Like, it's really, really good. Just kind of editing an image in real time, making fine-tune adjustments. So for storyboarding and creative ideation, like there's some really cool stuff happening there. But I get your point on 3D objects, especially in AR, where your environment is completely dynamic, where you have to think about, is someone going to do this in a low-lit living room? Or are they going to do it in a sunshiny beach? Where are people going to pull this game out? I imagine that's a very different struggle than just trying to generate like a...
Yes, it's definitely interesting. I'll say my secret tip I'll share with your listeners is IKEA is great. If you have a headset and you need a lot of rooms to test the thing in, IKEA has a lot of rooms that are just set up and you can test things in. So
that's like a genius tip. I've never thought about that before. Testing an AR app, just go through IKEA and wander around.
Just go through IKEA layouts with your head. You look like an idiot, but like you learn a lot quickly about like how are my algorithms doing for generations, because they've got tons of rooms. So, if you're not, as long as you're not like shy about, looking like a moron in public, it can be quite useful.
Honestly, even as someone who doesn't develop AR experiences, but like is very interested and interviews people like you on a regular basis, like I feel like I might do this just to test games. Like I imagine if before this interview, I could have gone to an IKEA and tested a bunch of your games beforehand, that could have made for a good test run to think of some questions for you.
Yeah, definitely. It's my secret tip that I don't think anyone has figured out. I'm sure some people figured out, but I do it and I think it's great.
No, I think that's super smart. Like they've already got the layouts for you. Like you don't have to go buy all the furniture and create a warehouse and set it all up yourself. Like just go into an IKEA. So whenever I talk to people who own and operate businesses, one thing I'm always curious about is there any metrics that you're looking at either daily or weekly, or like what are the numbers that you care about when you think about your business and how it's doing?
I have a very boring answer, but it is the most important number, which is the burn rate. The burn rate is the number that keeps me up at night. It's the number that I look at weekly at minimum. It's the number that my co-founder and I are always making sure we're reviewing monthly to make sure we understand. Everybody has it. It's not new, but it's the one that I look at the most because, when you're small, especially like us, and trying to build sustainably, not actively like blitz scaling. We're not, taking on a bunch of debt or anything. Like we're trying to grow AR business, AR games with the AR market. And that's like a hill that we don't really know how exactly it's going to curve. Like, we didn't want to see that hockey stick, but we don't know. Nobody does. So we're trying to be very careful with that, right? And like grow. And we've grown a bunch in the past couple of years. The opportunities have been quite good. It's a lot better than it was when we were getting no interest at all in our AR games on ARKit and AR Core, not even that long ago. But it's still not like, oh man, let's hire 100 people and like get this thing going. It's like, we got to really watch this, right? And so we're very cautious about, figuring out, hey, where do we want to invest? When do we want to bring people on? When do we want to scale the amount of work we're taking on to make sure we don't overextend? Because I think that's the thing that will be the end of us if we're not careful, is just like overextending, and then something changes in the market that like is very likely to happen, and then whoop, there it goes. So that's the one I look at the most, because user data is so weird right now. Like, we're across a bunch of different platforms. There's not a lot of uniform analysis of them. You get different stuff from Snapchat that you get from Meta versus what their player segmentations are, if they even think that way, right? Like, Snap thinks about users very differently. Like I said, they're like used to, player time or user times even of like, seconds. And we're looking for like minutes with like time slicing of like, what are they doing across this time? Much more traditional games metrics. It's really hard right now, at least for us, to pinpoint like a specific user demo that we're trying to chase and understand. And, we're really just trying to learn, and figure out like, what do these platforms do? How can we make stuff for their users? But a lot of our business is very B2B, right? We're doing, these tech explorations that aren't about a user acquisition goal at the end. They're about, how can you push this tech? Give us feedback on where we need to improve. How do we make these glasses bomb? Like, all these things are like, the things that people want to learn from us as developers, more than like, how many users can we pull in right now? And that'll change. We're going to invert at some point. And like, once we have more consumer viable stuff, probably the Quest 3 will be the first one, once the MR stuff starts to take off. But like, we're still so early on all that. Like, those feature sets came out like a year ago, if not less, so yeah, it's all about staying alive right now, and making sure that we can grow as we need to when opportunities arise. And so just being very, very cognizant of that is how we think about it.
Well, and it feels like the whole industry is really maturing right now. Like, this most recent Connect, I don't know about you, but I came out of that keynote just like overwhelmed. Like, I think there's so many updates that are kind of slept on because of how exciting Orion is and how everyone got really focused on that prototype, which, don't get me wrong, it makes sense. It's a very exciting prototype. Like, getting excited about Orion is something I did as well. Heck, I even bought the transparent Meta Ray-Bans, right? Like, I came out of it pretty hyped up. But there was all these little updates with AI language and digital twins of people, and some of the things they talked about with the developer upgrades and actually listening to what the developer community has been asking for. And one of those is like the camera API, for example, that people have been pushing for forever. So I think that some variables that are outside of our control as developers contributing to this technology, a lot of those things are slowly becoming unblocked and more standardized. And I think there's a lot more access to creating better experiences coming, and already started. Like, 2025 feels like it's going to be a very big year for this stuff. And 2 years, 3 years, 4 years out, it's only going to get easier. Which, with that, makes me think like, your vision for the business, like, is your goal to be a studio that pumps out essentially AAA AR VR games, or is your goal more to work with brands to help them understand this channel, or to continue pushing where the technology goes? Or where do you see this going as it does become more accessible?
I mean, our hope is to get into being, a traditional, if there is such a thing, game studio, right? Like, building cool games for customers that we understand and know and can count on to be excited about the things we're building, and like build a business where we're, very B2C, selling games to people and making people happy, have fun. That's what we'd like to do as a studio. Right now, like I said, it's kind of a weird time where that's not really the market that we've found ourselves in. And there's certainly people doing all kinds of different things in the space, but for us and the sort of path that we've been on, we've been much more B2B, and we like doing that too, right? Like, we love working with new hardware. We love working with stuff that doesn't work quite right yet and helping shape the future of this thing. Like, that's what is exciting about the time we're in right now. Is it's like, we can work with Snapchat on the spectacles and give them feedback on early versions of that stuff to, help improve the product, and sort of say, hey, from the game's perspective, this is what we would like to see happening with these platforms, same with Meta. Like, like you said, camera API, right? Like they're talking about that on stage because developers like us are all yelling at them like, we want the camera API, give it to us. So, that's very exciting, and that like we'd be very happy to keep doing that as long as that makes sense. But ultimately we want to build fun things for people, and so that's ultimately where I think where we'd like to get to. It's just a matter of getting that market saturation, getting those people that are looking for this content, that want to buy this sort of thing, that are going to give us that sustainable income that then we can use to say, all right, cool, we can invest in this sort of thing. I don't know what the AAA games market in AR looks like. Like, it's so early. It's like, what would that even be, and what kind of games are that? Like, that's really hard to project. Like, people always are like, I feel like assume that I have $1 billion idea for an AR game that, like, I'm just like, no one knows yet. It's not there. Like, it's too early. Like, I couldn't go to VC and pitch them with $1 billion AR game idea. And if you have one, you're probably wrong, because who knows, right? Like, we have Pokemon Go as the one example, and there's a lot of reasons that it was successful and continues to be successful. I think it's a great product, but like, there's not another one of those sitting around that we're all just like, well, someone will make that eventually. But that's what makes it fun. That's what brings me to the space and gets me out of bed every day, is that it's like, let's go figure that out. Like, what works in this space? What does this hardware do? What do people want to do? Like, that's what makes it super exciting to me compared to staying working on flat screen games where we've, kind of know what we're doing at this point. And it's a lot of fun, but there's something interesting about figuring this stuff out that I think drives most of us that are in the space right now.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think, AR is something where it's really tricky to have someone do an elongated experience, like for more than a couple of minutes, either in headset or on a phone. Like, either way, it's like getting someone to do 40 hours of gameplay in AR is kind of like unprecedented, right? Like whatever concept gets people doing that is going to be pretty interesting. And I think a lot of people are going to be talking about it. Like, that's going to be one of those things that is completely game changing for the industry. We're a little over time. I'm so grateful for you coming on the show and sharing your story. I think you're one of the most well-rounded people I've ever talked to in the space. Like, your history working in big AAA game design with Bungie, your time in the space and commitment to experimentation and building stuff on your own, and the quality of the stuff that you guys are working on now, I think speaks for itself. It's pretty exciting, the things that you're doing with Snapchat. So, Dustin, thanks for being here. Is there anything that you want to share or plug, or anywhere that people can follow you to learn more about you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're actually working on our biggest game ever so far. It's called Crystal Commanders. It's a mixed reality RTS game specifically for the Quest 3. We're very excited about this. We worked on this one for almost a year now. It's coming out in February, end of February next year. And it's super exciting. It's like basically the culmination of a lot of the stuff that we talked about today. But like, this was what we wanted to build back when we built our like X-Real and mobile game, to try and bring strategy gaming to your actual space. And with the power of the Quest 3, we can actually do that, using their incredible meshing APIs to be able to actually like turn your room into a map that you're playing, this game on. And so we're really excited about that. We really want to see what is a like AA style strategy game look like in MR. And so the game will have a full voiced campaign, multiplayer for players to play locally in the same space in whatever room they're in, or virtual reality driven multiplayer as well for people that aren't located in the same space. Support the Quest 2 and the Quest 3. Obviously, the Quest 3 is going to be the premier experience, but Quest 2 as well, with a full VR support in a virtual living rooms that we've developed to play the game in. So yeah, we're super pumped about that. We can't wait to get that out there and show people our vision for what a really large scale mixed reality title looks like that might hit some of those larger, engagement numbers. So very excited about that, and can't wait to get that in the hands of players. But yeah, if you want to find more about us, like our website, dbcreations.studio, has all of our current stuff we've built on there. And also a link to our Discord, which is currently very dead, but we're going to be ramping that back up very soon for the release of Crystal Commanders, which we're very excited about. We basically had to shut it down while we were doing our secret Snap stuff because you can't talk about any of the Spectacles development until they launched. Now that that's done, we can come out of hiding a little bit and start talking about our next stuff. So yeah, that's what we're up to right now. And yeah, super appreciate you having me on the show. This was a lot of fun, great conversation. Really enjoyed the questions that you asked. And I think, yeah, hopefully useful to some folks hearing a little bit more about how we're attacking working in the MR space.
That's the pod. Thanks so much, Dustin.
I met a rig!